Hi guys, today we're going to talk about how do I know so many things? How did I learn so much about watches? Where do I get my information? You see a bunch of books here, I have many more. That's where you're going to start. When you start collecting watches, a lot of people are going to read forums, a lot of people are going to read Hodinkee because of the novelties that come out. A lot of people are also going to read online through everything that's going on there. A lot of it is going to mix you up. You're going to have to funnel your concentration onto something that you really like. If you get to see or look for books, a lot of them are obviously concentrated on the most commonly sold watches, and Rolex is no such thing as a rare watch. It's just very much in demand. You're gonna have a lot of books that write about Rolexes. I'm by no means an expert into Rolexes. I know what I'm looking at. I do collect them for a very long time, but at the same time you do need those references like books. You do need to look at what the best sellers out there are gonna sell on their own platforms or on their own websites, and that's what will help you a lot. Obviously, if you have on hands something that's extremely rare, let's say a Comex or anything like a vintage sub, a sub red, a 5513, a 1675, 6239, whatever, each one of those references will have comparable sales in terms of condition, in terms of the dial, the case, and everything else, the variants. You have a lot of specialized websites online, and they will technically give you each piece of information about the dial, about the bezel, about the case, about the finishing, and so on and so forth. When you get to the books, you will have a lot of different pictures. They will give you a bit more history. They'll give you a lot of information about each one of those pieces that ended up either in auction houses or which are in huge collections, and you will have a very good idea of what the best is out there. Obviously, if you're starting off and you're a kid and you're 16, 18, you cannot hope to get into $100 or $200,000 watches to begin with. It's not something that's feasible. But what I'd say is at least look at what the best stuff is out there, and going through the books, you'll have a very good idea of what you might be collecting in 10, 20 years from now, or what you aim for or dream of. It starts with a dream. It starts with the knowledge of what you want to aspire to, and that's what the books help you with, because they will give you an image, they will give you a focus on something that you really want. A lot of people ask me, how did I start? How did I do what I'm doing right now? It started when I was 11 or 12 years old. I was in Costco every maybe 2-3 weeks, going with my parents on Saturdays and looking at the watches and the jewelry they were selling. I would literally dream of having like a Casio Timex. I didn't know any better. I was 11 years old. So I was looking at those Casio G-Shocks with the temperature, the altimeter, and all those functions that were really interesting for someone my age. And I was doing a lot of sports, and I could swim with it. I could do all sorts of things, go bike. I was out with that watch that my parents bought me forever, okay? I destroyed the watch. I still have it. So that's how my passion for watches started. It was the fact that I was always dreaming of having those Casio watches, and something that was a very good tool watch for a lot of people. When I started, I was 11 or 12. I didn't have the money to buy watches. By the time that I was 15 or 16, I had a few books. I had read quite a bit of, newspapers or magazines or many things that were talking about watches. If you ask me which kind of first book I bought that was really interesting, was the chronograph, okay? The chronographs were always very attractive in terms of design, in terms of the use of them, especially for military back in the 30s, the 40s, and they were very important watches. Therefore, a lot of the early developments might be Rolex, Patek, Lemania, okay, with Omega, Tissot, the 33.3 movement, which is very renowned, and then you have many different variants of those movements. But the early interesting part was actually to count time, and how better than a chronograph. Therefore, this book for me was one of the most important books when I started, and it's pretty complete. You're gonna have universals, you're gonna have a lot of you see the Omega, the chrono stop. I'm just going through it really quickly. You have really early, let's say mid 80s, I IWCs. You see a caliber 88 here. Then you have the Breitlings, anything from the Top Time series. Even if you think that you know it all, and you might know the book by heart, there's so many things out there that you will still learn going through other books. That's why I'm just showing you maybe, I don't know, we have like 15 books here on my desk right now. But it's just to show you how little you might know, even if you think you know a lot, okay? Here we have Rolexes, really early Rolexes from the 6234s, 6238s. I don't even need to look at the references here on the side because I know them. It's something that you need to kind of have in you when you're into vintage. There are so many different companies as well. There's about, in the vintage world, there's about 2,000 vintage companies that were basically sharing different designs, models, cases, dials, hands. So you might have really crazy unique pieces from a certain company. We looked at the Rodania geometer, which used the same dial, as the 3-to-1 caliber Omega Speedmaster, the 1957-2915. When you look at the dial, it's identical for the first series. The second series were a bit different. They're actually reversed. But when you're looking at that, it just makes it very interesting to see how the evolution of watches happened. And there was no such thing as a proprietary design for a lot of those companies. A lot of them were, I call it, sleeping with each other, because they were basically sharing designs, they were sharing cases, they were sharing pushers, okay? A lot of them were having dials, cases, pushers made by a third company, and they were using, for example, Omega, a modified Lemania movement, and they were putting it all in there. So for me, that was always very attractive to understand how each company was basically able to create new watches and how similar those watches were, yet so different in terms of design. And the more you look at them, the more they look the same, yet they're all so different. If you're looking at the split seconds, Longines from the 1930s, 1940s, stuff that I've never seen yet in my hands. They're extremely rare. You see here you have the number 60 in the chronograph book. You have a Longines actually double signed by Turler. So you have a tree function with button and crown. So it's a mono pusher, but it's extremely interesting. And this one is a 49 millimeter diameter, so huge for the time. Most probably a pilot's watch, may be used in either Germany or in other places as well. I know of quite a few watches that got pulled out of Romania. I'm Romanian, so a lot of military watches were there in Poland, in Romania, in Russia as well, that were distributed by those companies, even in the Second World War, directly or indirectly. So you do have a lot of history here. They explain to you how movements work. They explain to you the levers, the pushers, what each function of the watch is doing. So if you make one of those books or a few of those books that are really highly dedicated to watches, that give you information from mechanical down to each model and they explain to you what each watch is, you will basically eat it and be absorbed by all the information that those give. There's nothing else online that you might read, especially if you read forums and people just blabbering left and right, and a lot of them don't have any clue of what watchmaking is, what a real watch deal really is. I'd say a lot of those books, despite them being not necessarily all the way up to date with everything that's known now, they're a bit older, but for $50, $100, you're gonna have, I think, the best investment in terms of your knowledge. Even if you have, for example, people that promise you, I don't know, like dealing schools or how to make money with watches or whatnot, if you don't have at least the most basic knowledge, it's like me asking you to sell a Lamborghini without you knowing anything about the Lamborghini. It's the same thing here, but a Lamborghini is most probably much easier to sell than starting to basically know watches, because there's so much more into watches, so many companies, so many different variants and models. Therefore, I'd say if you like chronographs, I'd start with this one. It's a very classic book. Then if you do like, obviously there are quite a few books here. I have another one here that I was actually gifted by a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine. And for example, this one will have, as you see, you have the unauthorized history. So you do have the history of the company, how Hans Wensdorf started a company in England, how they moved to Switzerland, how they always try to make affordable watches yet develop a lot of the cases, a lot of the oyster cases that were, I think, developed in 1927, 1926, 27, and they're highly important in terms of what watchmaking is today. They oversimplified their watches because I know I work with them all the time, so you see the same movement in different variants, which is super cool, but there's nothing that special about Rolex when you look deep into them as much as the history of what they're doing. They haven't done anything insane in terms of movements. They've always tried to borrow movements from others for a long period of time. They were also using, for example, their movements for a very long period of time. Let's say the 1520 movement came out, I think, in the early 1962, 63, and they made it until 1989. Therefore, the R&D was very kind of slow in a way, but they did develop watches that are workhorses. They're working really well, but they're by no means anything spectacular. What they do very well, Rolex, is the fact that they're literally developing their marketing in a very, very good way, and everyone knows about their name. They need to have a Rolex to say to people, hey, I made it. For me, it's not as much about that as it is about collecting some of their models personally and the best condition possible. That's where I am at in my collecting. If you really need to prove anything to anyone by whatever you need, it's up to you, but really knowing the history and understanding where the company comes from and how they did it is a lot more interesting for me and my part than actually the selling part itself. It's more collecting and everything that goes with it. But this is also one of the books that I recommend highly. At least you'll understand where the company is coming from, and you will actually have a good base of talking to people who actually know and collect watches on the long term. If you come in my shop and you don't know a few of those models, obviously I'm gonna ask you to do your due diligence, because it is a bit frustrating to try and show you a watch if you're just looking at the best price possible, which happens, believe me, at least a few times a week. It's all about the fact that you have a good base of knowledge, and this one will give you as well what you're looking for. If you're getting deeper into Rolex, I think this is one of the good ones as well, because here we're looking at the sports models by Rolex. Most of what people are looking for, except their classic models like the Day-Day, the Datejust, and everything else that's pretty much known. Here we're looking at the classics sports watches, so 1016, 1675, 6234. I don't know if they have such old models, but I think they do. They also talk about the certificates, they talk about the pushers, they talk about everything else. Yeah, so you have a bit of everything from the early models up to the later ones. Obviously, the pictures are a bit doctored or too doctored in my point of view. Not all the watches are as perfect as the ones you're gonna see here in this book. But I'd say overall you have, again, a very good base of what people are talking about. Yeah, so let's see here in the Daytona or pre-Daytonas, do we have... Yeah, we don't have the pre-Daytonas here, or at least we have... Yeah, so we have a few of the Pandas and the Paul Newmans, but you don't have everything. So again, even if the book is concentrated on vintage Rolexes, they're not really gonna go above and beyond in every single intricate detail, but you'll have a good base again. You'll have a very good idea of what each model, each watch really is, and we can't avoid not knowing Rolex, okay, because again, they're so publicized. They sold so many watches. I think they're at over 45 million watches if I did my calculations right, more or less. Therefore, it's a very prolific company, maybe not as prolific as Omega did a lot of different variants, but they're easily traceable. Rolex is a lot easier to trace, to identify, and to pinpoint to years, to eras, to different designs in the dial. What is a sub red? How many variants of the sub red were made? Different dials, different hands, and so on and so forth. The inserts, the bracelets. What is a rivet bracelet? What is a Jubilee, an oyster bracelet? That is a very good base as well for people who start. We're just kind of touching the surface right now with those books. But there are so many different variants, including if we're looking at exclusive watches, you're gonna see here a lot of tourbillon watches, mono pushers, different brands like Ebel, which Ebel, for a lot of people, they think it's a kind of failed company and it's not such a good watch to buy and sell. Yet you have Cartier with platinum and pearls. You have a lot of really interesting models here that you will most probably never see in your lifetime, including myself. I don't even expect to see a lot of those watches in a lifetime, but you'll have a good base reading through a lot of different books here. You have the watches of the stars, and here obviously it's not the one you see the eyes of Paul Newman here, and then you see a Paul Newman watch. I have one right here on my wrist, so it's super cool. But again, this was not Paul Newman's Paul Newman, because he had a white dial with the black subdials, and that's the one that fetched the the record of $17.8 million US or something like that. It's a bit different, but again, you have the idea of a Paul Newman here, and the more you look into them, the more interesting you're gonna see that every single watch has its history, from Hamilton, from Cartier, from the Basculante. I'm just going through it really quickly. Then you have the Bulgari Serpenti or the Tubogas that have so many different things that were worn by stars out there or by people in movies. All those books, what's good about them is that they're gonna make you dream, they're gonna give you good basics. Okay, and for me it was the fact that every night I was dreaming about watches all the time, and it became a passion, an obsession. If you're like me, the more you're gonna read, the more you're gonna realize you know almost nothing about watches, including myself after so many years. Even though I don't know everything that comes out. I don't know all the novelties that are coming in the market every year, because it's almost impossible while working 7, 8, 10, 12 hours a day to actually learn everything. But at least you're gonna have a good basic here for vintage watches. If you read on my channel some comments, you're gonna see that certain people think that vintage watches are outdated or they don't really belong in a watch market right now. And I always found that books really tied me up and attracted me more and more to vintage, for the history part, for the fact that you're in contact with a book and you can reread it many times. You can look at different pictures. You can basically almost touch the watch. It's not a screen. It's not an opinion online. It's something that you read about. It's factual. It's gonna impregnate you with all the best information you can get for vintage. And a lot of people here that are writing those books, they're not really there to make any money. A lot of them did it by passion themselves. So you can tell that it's very intimate for themselves as well, and it will become to you as well. Those books for many will be very important to their everyday. Okay, not only are you gonna be connected to the book, because we watch movies, we consume everyday videos, shorts, a little bit of information here and there that is just vomited onto you, okay, all the time. And books will stay with you. You can always refer yourself to the book if you want to use that term, but you can always use that as a reference for your knowledge, as a reference for what you're gonna be teaching to other people as well. And most of it you will remember if you're reading a book, if you're really passionate about what you're going to be reading, despite what I'm saying or what any YouTuber will say. It's my own experience that talks, but watch books and history and everything that you will be reading upon here will stay with you for your lifetime. You'll not bring your watches in your grave, but you'll bring your knowledge with you in your grave. And that's very, very different. I hope that this video will help you. This is something that connects us to time on a daily basis, and on the fact that we are basically living through time ourselves, and those are a mark of what was 20, 30, 50 years ago. You have to remember that this is just the tip of the iceberg. The more you read, the more you learn, and the more hooked you're gonna be. Again, you cannot own all the watches. It's impossible. Even a billionaire could not buy everything that is in those books. It's not only a question of money, it's a question of passion, time that you're gonna put into your collecting, and knowing is better than owning. I'll finish with the last little bit of how to value watches. A lot of people will come to me and will look on Chrono24 and it's their only reference, and they'll look at the highest prices and at the craziest numbers they've ever seen on auction houses or whatnot, and they will value their watches with that respect, you know. And if you take the time to read about those watches, you'll understand that you have to do a bit of an average. You have to look at the condition, you have to look at how important those watches are or were, and it doesn't come down just to a number. A lot of people are just stuck with an idea that they will make the most money out of their watch if they own one watch, and they'll spend sometimes years trying to sell it and burning the watch. Everyone has heard about their watch, everyone has seen it, and so on and so forth. So if you really want to explore that view, obviously I don't like to evaluate watches for people anymore, because a lot of the times there's that disagreement from what they researched and what I know about the market, and that's why I don't evaluate watches. But when it comes to buying them, it's very easy. If you really want to have a good idea, you can look on multiple, again, auction houses. Lately in the past, you know, year, 2 years, you're gonna have a pretty good idea. Again, there's an average and there's, you know, the lower end, which are the poor condition watches. There are the better ones that are a bit more expensive or much more expensive, because that makes a huge difference in vintage. And then you have the history, and if you have the background of the watch and its history, it just makes it so much more valuable for collectors looking for those specific pieces. If you really did like the video, please comment knowledge, and I'll know that you're part of the people who are really interested by this video. It's not gonna be the most viral video out there. I'm not looking for that. I'm here to give you a bit of a basic tool to actually collect, or to actually start collecting, or actually buying and selling if you're really interested by this. Again, you have to be hands-on as well. This is the theory right here, and then you have to put it in action if you're ever interested into buying, selling, or trading watches. This is basically the seed that you're gonna plant by reading those books, and there are so many steps into collecting and reselling if you do want to do such a thing. And it starts also by the fact that you're gonna have to be hands-on, you're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna learn, and the more you read those books, the more you're gonna realize very few people know a lot about watches. Therefore, be curious, enjoy your week. Thank you for following, and I'll see you next week.